So with that, I get the absolute privilege of working on the next pattern from this book. And the next pattern is called Linea. The designer is Miina Sorvala, and this is what they look like. This is one of those patterns that when I flipped through the book for the first time, I saw it and really, really liked it. I have been looking forward to making these, and I have decided that I'm gonna use Isayur sock yarn, which is 40% alpaca, easy wash alpaca, which I'm assuming just means super wash, 40% easy wash merino wool, and 20% recycled nylon. I'm very curious about this because I have used Drops Nord a couple of times, which is an alpaca sock yarn, but it felts a lot. Whereas this is a superwash yarn, so I'm hoping maybe it doesn't felt as much. And I really like the color. It's kind of this cinnamon, super warm cinnamon color. And you know, it is November as I'm filming this, so I'm definitely in the fall, you know, harvest color mood. So I'm looking forward to using this yarn, and it has like a little bit of fluffy halo coming out of it, and I just like that. So there are cables in this pattern. However, they look to be 1x1 cables, and I remember from the Imker sock that I learned an awesome new technique on how to do that without having to use a cable needle. So I think I'm gonna borrow that technique and use it again, and it'll make my life a lot easier. And the other notable thing about this sock is that it's again a toe-up sock. So 2 out of the 3 sock patterns that I've done out of this book, the most recent ones, have been toe-up. And I also, in the meantime, have also just knit a separate pair of socks. Actually, I have them right here. And this is a pattern that I kind of invented for myself. And yeah, they were also toe-up. So I've been doing nothing but toe-up socks. And, you know, I have a headache right now and I don't really want to do toe-up socks. However, I understand why you would want to do that. What's really nice is that this little diamond shape starts right at the toe. So if you're doing them cuff down, it would be hard to gauge how long to make the foot and how long to make the... You kind of have to do this toe up in order for the pattern to not be interrupted. So I get it. I just don't feel like doing it. I want to do something easy. Anyways, it says to do Judy's magic cast on or preferred method, and my preferred method is the Turkish cast on, so that's what I'm gonna do. And other than that, I don't see anything really all that new in here, but I will check in when I have something significant to say. I will have at least 3 hours to work on this at work tomorrow. However, if my headache doesn't go away, or if it gets worse again, I don't know if I'm gonna make it to work tomorrow. Anyways, I think I'm gonna do size 2. It tells you to use a 2.5mm needle. Usually I like to use 2.25. However, there's a lot of like twisted rib throughout the sock, which does cinch in the fabric a little bit. So I think I'm gonna do size 2 with the recommended needles. I'm not gonna do a gauge swatch. No, I think I refuse to gauge swatch for socks. I think that's the hill I'm gonna die on. Good evening. It's been about 24 hours since my last update. I didn't go to work today. I still had a headache, so I made the decision to use a couple of my sick day services, which I almost never use. That's what they're for. I don't have to feel guilty about it. Anyways, I am feeling a lot better now though. So I think I'm okay. So because of that, I ended up spending a lot of time at home. Well, I spent the whole day at home actually. And I started the sock this morning. I didn't get anything done last night. I pretty much went straight to bed after that update. But I have just finished the foot as well as the gusset. So this is what it looks like. And I love this sock. I also love this yarn. I just love alpaca. It's so velvety and nice. And I love this stitch pattern. It's so elegant and I can't wait to block it because I know it's gonna look even nicer. And yeah, I've been using that technique I learned from the Imker sock of how to knit, you know, without having to use a cable needle for 1x1 cables, which are all over the place. I mean, these are all cables and so are these. So definitely a cable heavy pattern, but it's a lot easier than it used to be, which is fun and nice. Anyways, so the next thing to do is the heel turn. I actually would say that I'm probably more than halfway done already on this sock, because you have to do 4 of these diamonds. Well, you don't have to, but I think it'll end up being 4 of these diamonds, and I'm already, you know, maybe a quarter of the way through the 3rd diamond. So I'd say I'm about halfway done if you consider the fact that I do have to do the heel. And then there is like a little cuff as well. However, the cuff doesn't seem to be all that long. I think it's just like 8 rounds or something like that. Anyways, so we'll see how the heel construction works probably tomorrow. And I do have a rehearsal and a concert tomorrow, so I don't know how much knitting time I will have, but it would be kind of cool to knit this up in 2 days. We will see. I'm not gonna make any promises, but yeah, pretty happy with my progress today. It's pretty much all I did all day. Well, that and sleep. Anyway, okay, good night. Hello. So I have gotten to the point in my sock where I am well past the heel, and I thought I would take this moment to compare and contrast this heel with a couple of the other socks that I've knit recently that are also toe up and that have a heel flap and gusset. So this is now my 3rd pair of socks that I'm constructing in this way, and all 3 of these patterns have been constructed in slightly different ways. I am pretty sure that there is a way of knitting a heel flap and gusset toe up where you do have to pick up stitches, but so far all 3 of these socks are not constructed in that way. You actually, you know, increase in the gusset and then you decrease, and that's what creates the heel flap. So starting with what I have just knit, I am particularly a fan of this one because it has reinforced stitching also on the heel turn at the bottom. And for me, that's particularly useful because I tend to wear out my socks exactly here, more so than on the back of the heel. I wear out my socks on the bottom of my heel. So it's useful for me to have that reinforced stitching there. So I like that a lot. And let's just compare it with the other sock that came from this book, which is the Imker sock. And this is the first time that I constructed a heel this way, toe up, and it was kind of a revelatory moment for me because I didn't know that that was possible, and I really like this construction. So this one looks a little different because it's an Eye of Partridge heel, which is just a little bit of a different look with the reinforced stitching, but it's kind of pretty much the same. My issue with this sock is that the heel flap is quite short. It's like maybe an inch long. And it's funny because these socks are knit on the same size needles, and I'm pretty sure they have the same amount of rows, but it seems to be bigger on this sock. So I don't know if that's just the yarn or maybe the Eye of Partridge heel changes things a little bit. I'm not totally sure, but after I had knit these socks, oh, and the way of turning the heel, and I think the decreases are also different on both of these socks, but you do end up with something that is pretty similar. Something that I really like about the toe up version of the heel flap and gusset rather than the cuff down version is that the decreases are so tidy. And I find that that is not always the case when I'm picking up stitches. I end up with like a little bit of extra yarn right where I had those slip stitches. So I do really like that when working the toe up version of this. So after I had knit the Imker socks, I was so impressed with this, and I wanted to redevelop it in such a way that it would be quite a bit longer because my instep is, I mean, I don't think it's particularly high, but it is higher than this. And I also wanted to be knitting with 2.25 millimeter needles. That is kind of my go-to. So I had this self-striping yarn that I wanted to use up, and a good way of using it all up is by doing toe up, so I decided that I would use this opportunity to develop a new heel flap and gusset recipe for toe up socks using the Imker sock as kind of my starting point, but I changed it so much that I don't think I can really say it is the same heel anymore. There was a lot of math, there was a lot of trial and error, and I do think that I came a lot closer to having that perfect fit that I find that I have with my cuff down version of the heel flap and gusset. So I was quite proud of myself for that. It was very difficult for me. I'd never done anything like that before. So that is this sock. And actually it looks pretty similar to what I'm currently knitting because it doesn't have the partridge heel. So I'd be curious to sort of redevelop this heel, but also incorporate this reinforced stitching at the bottom. And, you know, I think I still would need to adapt my stitch count and how many increases I do and stuff on this. I just really like knitting with 2.25 millimeter needles. So if I can find a way to adapt this into a 2.25 millimeter formula that works for me, I will be a happy gal. The trouble with knitting toe up and heel flap and gusset is that you have to know, and actually honestly I feel this is a challenge with all toe up socks, is that I find it really hard to gauge how many increases to do, when to start doing the increases. With cuff down socks you can kind of figure that out as you go, but with toe up you sort of have to have a plan ahead of time. Also with the heel flap, if you find that, oh, I wish it were a little bit longer or shorter, it's kind of too late. You would have to tink back quite a bit in order to, you know, adapt that. So that's sort of the big drawback for me with toe up, but if I can find the perfect recipe, then I'll just use that from now on. Okay, so that's enough about heels, and there is one other pair of socks that I wanted to compare this sock to. So I'm going to flip this around, and now we're going to talk about cabling. So this here, if you remember, is my Cresspedia sock by Andrea Mowry. It was, I think, maybe pattern number 6 or 7 in this book. It's part of my series, part of my challenge. And I'm not gonna lie, I have a little bit of a grudge against these socks because I hadn't yet learned how to knit cables, 1x1 cables, without pinching the stitches, and there's just a lot of cabling, a lot of tiny cabling in this sock, and I actually had to stop knitting for about 3 months afterwards because my wrists and my thumbs hurt pretty badly. But it's okay, we can forgive the socks for that. I found the most difficult thing on this pattern, other than the baubles, of course, were these cables that run next to the baubles because they're actually knit through the back loop. And I was curious about how the look would differ between the back loop cable knitting versus not through the back loop knitting. So this sock doesn't have that at all. And if you compare these diamonds to the little swirls, you can definitely tell that the ones on the Andrea Mowry socks are much tighter and probably a little bit neater and finer. And it's something I wanted to consider because in the future, I don't know that I really want to do that. It was quite hard on my hands. I think it was also hard on my hands because it's all the way down the sock. It never really stops. You don't really get a break from it. And I'm finding this current sock a lot easier and more pleasant to knit because I'm not having to do that. But if you look at it, you know, this is a lot looser. It's maybe a little bit less clean and straight. Keep in mind, these have not been blocked yet, so that might change things a little bit. It's just a bit of a different look, so in the future, if I encounter something like this again, I might consider whether or not I actually want to follow the pattern in that way, or if I give my thumbs a bit of a break and just knit them regular. Anyways, I just thought that was interesting to compare next to each other. So with my current sock here, I am just gonna knit one more of these diamonds and then I'll do the cuff and then I'll be done my first sock. Hello, so it's been a couple of days. I actually finished my socks a few days ago. Here are my beautiful, beautiful socks. I love these. And once again, I have one blocked and one not blocked. So I'm just gonna show you the blocked one. So just to recap, this sock is called the Linea sock. It is designed by Miina Sorvala. And this is one of my favorite socks that I have made out of this book so far. I don't know if it is my number one favorite, but it's definitely like either first place or second place. I really, really like this sock. I'm also quite happy with the yarn. I just love alpaca. All right, so I'm gonna go with my rating system. Difficulty, I'm rating this a 4 out of 10. It's actually not that hard, and there weren't really any new techniques for me in this, but it kind of reminded me of the Crespidia sock in the sense that you're cabling on every second round. It is sort of a long pattern repeat, and even though I did memorize it eventually, I do kind of have to keep focusing. And once you're done with, I mean, it's toe up, so once you're done with the foot, there's no more stockinette anything. So even on the back of the leg, you're still doing cabling. It's less complicated, but you're still cabling. So there's always kind of something going on, but I kind of like that because it keeps me engaged. I don't get as bored, but it does, slow me down, and I do need to concentrate a little bit. So that's why it's getting 4 out of 10, though it really isn't very difficult at all if you know how to do all of those techniques. What I learned, not really very much. I did another heel flap and gusset toe up, which was a different formula from the other ones that I've done. I was just talking about that in my last clip. And so it's just being added to my Rolodex of recipes for heel flap and gussets for toe-up socks. And it's so far, I'd say it's probably my favorite one. Again, like I said, I really like that it's reinforced also on the heel turn. I think that is very practical because that is probably where my sock is gonna get the most wear. Is this lunch break appropriate? I'm gonna say that it is not, because I actually did knit on this sock right near the end. I was probably around here at work. We had like a 2.5-hour break in between concerts, and we had our general meeting, and I was knitting as we were going. And I had memorized the stitch pattern long ago. I didn't have any complicated heel things to do at that point, but I messed up my cables. I put them in the wrong place, in the wrong row, and like I spent more time that day like unknitting and doing cable surgery than I actually did just knitting. So as I said, it's not that complicated, but you do kind of have to be focused, and I found that I couldn't really multitask when knitting on this sock. I could, have a YouTube video or something playing in the background, but if I was in a meeting or if I was chatting with a colleague or whatever, I just kept making mistakes. So I would say no, not lunch break appropriate, unfortunately. How long did it take me? The first sock took me 3 days. The second sock took me 2 days. Those were very light working days. It is not the fastest sock that I have knit, despite the number of days. I just spent a lot of time knitting on those days. But yeah, not supremely long either. I enjoyed myself, so whatever. Would I knit these again? Yes, absolutely. What would I change? Probably nothing, honestly. I prefer a 2.25 millimeter needle. I just like the fabric that it makes, but I think because this yarn blooms a lot when you block it, it kind of filled out and it's sort of okay. But I am curious to try and develop or redevelop this heel where I can make it a little bit deeper so that I can use that recipe for toe-up socks when I'm using 2.25 millimeter needles. So that is maybe the only thing that I would change, but that just sort of depends on the yarn. Overall rating, I'm gonna rate these a 9 out of 10. I'm pretty sure that is the highest rating I've given so far. As I mentioned at the top of this clip, I love these socks. They are one of my favorites that I've made so far. Such a pretty texture and not very difficult cabling, and I just think they're gorgeous. I also love my yarn that I chose. So, love these, excited to wear them at some point. So, because I wasn't feeling great yesterday, I didn't film this clip when I normally would have. I actually ended up starting the next pair of socks in this book without updating you first. But anyways, we're just gonna pretend that I didn't do that for a second. So the next pair of socks, which happens to be the last pair of socks in the first quarter of this book, because it is separated into kind of 4 quadrants, 4 seasons, I don't know, 4 chapters, is the Heartichoke, not artichoke, but Heartichoke pattern by Josephine and the Seeds, which sounds like a very cool 60s revivalist band. Anyway, so this is what they look like. They're super feminine and dainty. They've got a little bit of a lace pattern on the cuff and some twisted rib. And there's a second picture here, so I might as well just show you that. Here's another view of them, and I actually really like how they've styled them in this book, where there are these kind of muddy red, clay red corduroy pants with some black tights underneath. I think that looks really, really nice and cozy, very autumnal. I mean, look at, if that's not a picture of autumn, I don't know what is. Anyways, so that is the pattern that I'm working on now. And I'm just gonna go ahead and show you what I've done so far. So I did the toe and probably about 2/3 of the foot before I need to go ahead and start doing increases in the gusset. So first of all, I'll start at the beginning. It tells you to do Judy's Magic Cast On, and unlike some of the other socks that I've done, it doesn't say Judy's Magic Cast On or your preferred method. And as much as possible, I am trying to be loyal to what I'm reading in the pattern. So I did Judy's Magic Cast On just for the very first pair of socks in this book, the intersection sock, and then I discovered the Turkish Cast On and decided I liked that better, and I have been doing that ever since. But I thought, you know, let's just give Judy's Magic Cast On another try and see if I despise it. And I don't. I actually think it's pretty good. It's just a different method. I think the Turkish Cast On is like easier to memorize, but your stitches are like, because you just start by wrapping the yarn around the needles, and so there's nothing like holding it together in the beginning, so it's easy to like accidentally drop stitches and you end up with a whole bunch of extra slack, so you just kind of have to be more careful. But the actual process, like the steps themselves, are easier. Whereas Judy's Magic Cast On, the way you like twist the needles and the yarn is something that I just have to concentrate, and I still don't feel like I have it quite memorized and in my muscle memory. But once you do that first step, then it is quite a bit easier. So I don't know, I feel like the first step of the Turkish Cast On is easier, and then the second steps are harder, and then the opposite for Judy's Magic Cast On. So I don't know, I might revisit Judy's Magic Cast On for my future toe-up socks. We will see. So that's what I started with, and I did the toe. And okay, so there is an errata in this pattern, and you can find that for free on the Laine website. And I'm very confused because the errata is in this. There's little bit of cabling in this pattern. It's just here at the beginning of the instep and then nowhere else in the sock. So if you are a cable hater, you can probably just, you know, push through that one little section and then you're done with cabling. It's not an all over cable like the Linea that I just did. But yeah, apparently there's a mistake in there, but reading the errata and then looking at my book here, if I understood correctly, the little symbol for like knit through the back loop apparently is missing in the cable chart, but it's there in mine. I don't know, maybe they fixed it. But there is another weird thing that I have in my book. For the size 2, I'm knitting size 1, so it actually doesn't even apply to me, but for size 2, and I'll insert like a little snippet of that part of the chart here. It won't give anything away regarding the pattern, but in the margin, there's like these cable symbols that it's almost like the editor wrote themselves note in the margins and then like forgot to remove them. There's like a random letter L and some random cable symbols that have nothing to do with anything. Anyway, so I feel like in my book, one errata was corrected and then a different errata was added, but I think you can probably just ignore that. Anyways, I'm knitting size 1, so it doesn't apply to me, and other than that, it's been pretty clear. So yeah, these cables are, I've never done this, but they are 2x1 and 1x2 cables. So I've never done cables over 3 stitches. I didn't even really consider that as a possibility, but why not, I guess. And it creates these cables that they almost look like slipped stitches because they're pulled over, 1 stitch is pulled over 2 stitches. Anyways, it's an interesting look, and it creates like a little arrowhead at the beginning of the instep. Oh, speaking of toe up, I almost wasn't gonna do these socks because I was so sick and tired of knitting toe up socks. But when I woke up yesterday morning, I was like, you know what? I can do it. And then I looked ahead in this book, and the next pair of socks is also a toe up sock. So I don't know what's going on. This book really wants me to embrace toe up knitting, but it's fine. It's fine. Anyways, oh yeah, and the yarn. I didn't even talk about the yarn. So I bought this yarn a few months ago with this pattern in mind. As I mentioned, it is called the Heartichoke sock. And this yarn is called Another Artichoke by Color of My Fiber or Couleur de mes Fibres. And I just think it's super pretty and kind of wintry. And I was a little bit on the fence as to whether or not I should use this yarn because sometimes with hand-dyed yarns that have a lot of different colors in it, it can really compete with the design. So I was looking at this and wondering if maybe it was not the wisest choice to do that. But then I looked at the project pages, and a couple of people used variegated yarns, and I thought it looked fine. And actually, now that I'm knitting it, I think it's actually really pretty. And I love this yarn. I've used Color of My Fiber for I think 3 pairs of socks in this book, but 4 pairs of socks in total. And it's really plushy and soft, but also very hard wearing. Because I've had yarns that sort of look like this, but then as I'm knitting, they sort of feel like they're already disintegrating. I really love this yarn. It is, maybe I'll talk about my impressions of all of the yarns that I've used so far at the end of this chapter. But yeah, it's one of my favorites. And it's just so pretty, and it's kind of wintry, and winter is coming. That's just the stockinette on the instep, but yeah, I definitely think that you can see this ribbing pattern. Anyway, so tonight I have some concerts and I'm gonna have some time to kill in between, so I'm gonna be bringing this with me. The pattern changes for the heel. It's again a heel flap and gusset, but a different heel flap and gusset yet again. But I don't think I'm gonna get to that point yet tonight, so I'm not too worried about bringing this to work. I just have to do a very simple ribbing pattern on the top of the foot and stockinette on the bottom, and I'll probably end up having to start with the gusset increases, which are actually done with yarn overs rather than like make one left or make one right or knit front back like the other patterns I've done so far. So looking at the sock here, you can kind of see it. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but you do see like little tiny pinholes where the gusset increases are. So I'm like a little skeptical. I've never done a yarn over as an increase when it wasn't really in a lace pattern. But yeah, we'll see how that turns out. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this sock evolves, and I'm just thoroughly enjoying knitting with this yarn. So more updates to follow. I'm very early to my rehearsal, and so I'm knitting at work. Here's the proof you needed that I do leave my house sometimes. I am in a different place. Look at me go. I'm knitting in a new different place that isn't my house. You want to see the haul? It's really pretty. Hold on. Not too shabby, huh? They're not real. I'm back in my apartment, in my boring apartment. Anyways, I have some updates on this sock. As you can see, I am nearly finished. So first of all, the eyelets, well, not the eyelets, but the yarn overs in the gusset, I worried I'm like sharing too much about these patterns, so I'm not going to tell you exactly how you work them, but you work them in such a way where they close up and there are no eyelets. So that's that. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that I have now gotten to the point where I just have to knit the cuff, but you can see this, actually you can see it quite nicely on camera, this like honeycomb design here, and this is a lace chart. However, it's usually when I think of lace, I think of like a lot of eyelets and open space. It's not really that kind of a lace chart. I mean, there are some eyelets, but it's not very prominent. Really, what's prominent are these. It almost looks like cabling, honestly, but it's not. And when I was reading about this pattern on the Ravelry page, this is supposed to look like artichoke leaves. So I guess that's kind of where, sorry, my hair is crazy, where the name of the pattern comes from. And let's go back to the yarn for a second. I love this yarn. I actually really like how it looks in the twisted rib because I feel like the yarn kind of creates these horizontal lines and then the ribbing creates these vertical lines. So it kind of creates this like crosshatch effect. However, for the leg motif, it is a little bit muddled. It looks quite nice right now because you're getting shadows from my lamp over there. But when I look at it from far away, it does just kind of look a little bit messy and confusing. That's okay. I don't really mind. I do like the color pooling. I think that's pretty cool. And I still really like this yarn and I don't regret it as a choice. So my one sort of problem that I'm running into now is that it's kind of tight to get this over my heel. In the pattern, it tells you to go up a needle size once you get to the point in the leg where your calf is growing, which actually made me think about my Imker sock from a while ago, you know, the one where I made a super long leg and then, you know, it's kind of tight on my leg now. At the time I was thinking, oh, maybe I need to do some increases next time, but yeah, you could just go up a needle size. That would have solved that problem. Anyways, too late now, but it is recommended in this pattern. However, I tried the sock on after doing one pattern repeat in this lace chart and I could barely get it on. It's not anything to do with my calf size where it's too tight on my calf. It's just hard to get it over the instep. This is a much less stretchy fabric. So I decided to go up in needle size after one pattern repeat. And now the pattern is telling me to go down in needle size for the cuff, but I think I'm kind of spooked and I think I'm gonna keep knitting with these 2.25 millimeter needles. And for second sock, I might switch. I want the socks to match, and you can kind of tell that these little honeycombs are smaller than the ones up here. But I think for the second sock, I'm gonna just knit the entire leg with the bigger needles. And it'll probably look the same when I'm wearing the socks. One sock will just be slightly easier to put on than the other one. Right now, I'm really struggling to get this on. Once it's on, it fits very well. And I'm hoping that with the blocking, it might open up a little bit more. I can definitely get the sock on, but I do have to like wrestle with it just a little bit. Anyways, oh, and one last thing. This pattern tells me to do a sewn bind off using Elizabeth Zimmerman's sewn bind off method, which I've never done. I have only done, was it Judy? I always get Judy and Jenny mixed up. Jenny's surprisingly stretchy bind off, or is it Judy? Judy's Magic Cast On? I think it's Judy's Magic Cast On and Jenny's surprisingly stretchy cast off, bind off. I've done that. And I've also done an Italian sewn bind off, which I think is really pretty for 1x1 ribbing, which this will not be. However, it's not as stretchy as I would like it to be for socks. And then Jenny/Judy's method is stretchier, but I don't love how it looks. So I watched some tutorials on the Elizabeth Zimmerman sewn bind off and it looks super, super easy. So I'm really hoping that I like the stretch and that I like how it looks, but it's supposed to look exactly like long tail cast on. So I think I am gonna like how it looks. I think the real question is, am I gonna like the amount of stretch that it gives me? I'll be sure to do it on the loose side because I'm a little bit scared of things being too small with this sock now. But yeah, it's by far the easiest of the methods that I've seen so far. So I have high hopes for that bind off method. I hope it works out for me. We will see, and I'm definitely finishing this sock today, and then I'll get on with sock number 2. Hello, so I am about to leave the house. I've called an Uber. It's going to be here in 7 minutes. I have my second sock with me. I'd say I'm about 2/3 of the way through the gusset increases, and I'm about to be on a 5.5, 6 hour long train ride. So I'm gonna see how much knitting I can get done on my sock today. Maybe I'll finish it on this train ride. I don't know. I'm definitely gonna want to take some breaks. It's gonna become nighttime at some point. So we'll see how much progress I make. But wouldn't it be cool if I finished my last sock in this section on the train? I think it would. Anyways, updates to follow.
Voiture, en lisant le dépliant situé dans la pochette du siège devant vous et en repérant les sorties de secours les plus près. Si vous devez vous déplacer.
A little over an hour in, and I have just finished the gusset. And it's dark out, so no more nice views. It's about an hour and a half later, and I have finally finished the heel turn and the heel flap. And now it's onto the leg. That was about, I guess, 2.5 hours total from around here to there. I did take some breaks, some short breaks, and I think I'm gonna take an actual real break now because my brain is turning to jello. As you can see, I got the fantastic Via Rail red wine. And then it's just this ribbing pattern that I will get going on. It doesn't look like much, but I have done the ribbing part of the leg, and now I'm gonna move to my bigger needles right away this time for the lace pattern, and this will probably be my last little update because I remember that pattern being very involved and my brain is turning to mush. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with what I've gotten done so far. That took me about half an hour, so I'd say this was about 3 hours of active knitting to get from here to there. It's not too bad. Oh, thank you for the kisses, Lily. Oh, thank you. Hello, so I have a bit of a confession to make. That last clip was filmed on the 28th of November, I believe, 2024, and I am filming this on the 12th of March, 2025. So it's been a minute, and there's a reason for that. So I had been traveling when I filmed those last few clips, and the reason why I was traveling was because I was visiting my aunt who was in hospital, and at that point she'd been in the hospital for about 8 months, I believe. And unfortunately she did pass away not very long after that, so I don't know, my priorities just kind of shifted, and I don't want to say I fell off the wagon. That seems a little dramatic, but I didn't really keep up. However, I did finish the socks, and you know, a little bit of time has passed now and I'm ready to talk about the socks. So here they are, the Heartichoke socks. So first of all, I'd like to just share a funny little story of what happened on that day of those last clips. I went out into the public, into the world, and I was knitting on these in a cafe. I was wearing my jean sweater, and I had, I think, no less than 3 people come up to me and ask me about my knitting. Oftentimes other knitters will come and talk to me, or people who have knitters in their life. There was also this, I debated whether or not to share this, but I think it's kind of funny, so I'm going to share it anyways. There was this guy sitting at the table next to me, and he asked me a couple of questions about knitting, but other people also asked, so I guess he gathered a bit of information, and he asked me what my name was at one point, so I told him my name was Carmen, and then he handed me a napkin a little bit later, and he wrote me a poem. So I actually ended up reading the poem, and I have decided since then to not include it, because I think the poem could be interpreted as maybe slightly creepy, and I don't want to make fun of him or anything like that. All you need to know is that these socks were so inspiring that they provoked a poem to be written about them. Anyways, I don't know what his name is. I was very worried that, I don't think he was trying to make a pass at me because there's no number or anything here. But I did keep it, and I came across it the other day. I actually forgot that had happened. Anyways, so this sock inspired a poem. It was a creative expression inspired by my knitting of these socks. So that was a first. Anyway, so I'm gonna go and give you my rating system now. From what I remember, it was kind of a while ago. I should have done this sooner. But anyways, difficulty, I rated this a 4 out of 10. I don't remember it being particularly hard. I remember the lace chart, even though this doesn't really count as lace in my eyes, but it was referred to as a lace chart, was a little bit involved, and it was easy to kind of get lost in it. But other than that, it was a pretty easy sock. How long did it take me to knit? I honestly don't really remember, but I was thinking about it last night, and I'm gonna guess that it took me somewhere around 7 days, I think. Was this a lunch break appropriate sock? I think that most of it was. I think, the toe until this part of the leg was, but I do remember being struggling a little bit with the leg of the sock, and I did mention that in some of my footage, so that has been confirmed. So I'm saying no, but would I knit it again? Yes, I would. I don't think I would really change very much. I might have and I actually did make this change for the second sock. I would have changed to the larger needle sizes right away. I tried these socks on last night, and by looking at them, I can't tell which one I knit first, but by trying them on, I very much can, because there's one that barely gets on my foot. And actually, it was getting it off that was harder, which is a little bit scary. Because what happened if my foot were wet or there was too much friction? I would probably have to cut the sock off my foot. So anyways, I recently acquired size large sock blockers, so I might actually block these again on size large, because once I get them on my foot, they fit perfectly. It's just not very stretchy on the leg. I might also use a different yarn. I talked about this in my clips, but yeah, in the leg pattern, it does get a little bit muddled. You don't see it that clearly, but I still really like this yarn. I'm not mad about it. What did I learn from having knit these socks? I actually learned a lot. I'll start with the most impressive thing to me, which is the bind off. I did a sewn bind off for the first time. It is has quickly become my favorite bind off. In fact, I actually did that bind off for this sweater. So I've applied that knowledge to other things. It looks just like a long tail cast on, which is actually why I chose it for the sweater, because that's how I cast on in the beginning. Anyways, it's so pretty, it's so easy, and it's stretchy. So this is gonna be my go-to bind off from now on for toe-up socks. I also learned that Judy's Magic Cast On is actually pretty good. I think that I gave it a hard time in the very beginning because, I was a beginner and I didn't know what I was doing, and it was hard. And the Turkish cast on is a little bit easier at first. However, if I compare these two cast-ons, the Turkish cast on, though it's a little bit easier in the beginning, I often end up with some slack in that first row of knitting. So Judy's Magic Cast On, even though the twist and wrapping pattern that you have to do is a little bit hard to wrap your mind around, you end up with, at least I find that I end up with a tidier cast on. And once you get the hang of it, it's actually not that hard. So I think I might be converting to Judy's Magic Cast On. Anyway, I learned that a yarn over does not guarantee an eyelet. If you look at the gusset there, those increases were done with yarn overs, but you work them in such a way that it closes up. So that was interesting for me to learn, and I might reuse that knowledge in the future. I also learned that a lace chart does not guarantee laciness. This part of the pattern, I don't know if it was just mislabeled in the pattern, but it's referred to as a lace chart. And in my mind, a lace chart always has yarn overs and holes and eyelets. This is just a series of increases and decreases, and it looks more like cabling. It's not cabled, but it looks like cabling to me. It does not look like lace to me. Anyway, so that was interesting for me to learn, and it's, you know, it's not that stretchy as we have established, so I will have to be mindful of that in the future. Overall, I am rating these socks a 7 out of 10. I think they're really nice. I might make some small changes if I were to knit them again, but overall I'm really happy with them. Even though the yarn does kind of hide a little bit of the stitch pattern in the leg, I still think it's really, really pretty. It's a very wintry yarn, and the pattern is beautiful. Twisted rib, it just looks so clean and nice. Anyways, so yeah, with that, I have finished the first quarter of 52 weeks of socks. Amazing. And here they all are in all of their glory. One whole year of knitting. So there you have it. 1 year later, and I have gotten through 1/4 of this book. Here are all 13 pairs of socks. There is no way of being able to show you all of these and letting them all shine in their full glory like this, but it gives you a little bit of a glimpse of some of the work that I did in 2024. Full disclosure, I think I knit about somewhere between 25 and 30 pairs of socks last year, so it wasn't just these 13 pairs. It was about twice as many as that. So I definitely could have gotten to the end of chapter 1 faster had I focused on this. But yeah, anyways, I think now would be a pretty fun time to reflect and review a little bit all of the socks that I made and go over some statistics. So I started this challenge at the end of January, and I finished the first chapter at the beginning of December. I don't know the exact dates, but it was almost a year. It was the better part of a year. So, you know, about a pair of socks per month, or maybe 1 pair of socks every 3 weeks, something like that. So at this rate, it is going to take me 4 years to finish this challenge. Maybe I'll be able to pick up the pace. Maybe I won't. We will see. Hopefully I live to see the end of it. So you may have noticed throughout these videos that whenever I talked about yarn, I put the name of the yarn in the corner, and I also wrote a total amount that I paid for it. And the way that I counted that, so I'll use these as an example. I had a new skein of yarn that I used for the main color, but then I used a scrap from another project for the contrast. So I didn't count the scrap amount. I only counted the new skein that I broke into. And that was particularly interesting for the lumpy sock because I actually only used scraps for this sock, so technically this came up to a total of $0. So I was a little bit worried to do this because I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the answer to this question. But I was responsible and brave, and I calculated the amount of money that I spent on yarn for this project, and it came up to a grand total of $292.23 Canadian. And on screen, I'll convert that into a couple of the common currencies. So just under $300 Canadian on yarn for the first quarter of this book. I also tallied up the amount of money that I spent on needles and hooks. I didn't count the needles that I had already purchased before starting this challenge. So there were 3 additional needles that I needed to buy and 1 crochet hook. So that came up to $55.95 Canadian. And then the last expense was the book itself, which I got the paperback version of, and I paid $19.99 for it. So 1/4 of this book, which is the amount of patterns that I knit, amounts to $5. So I spent $5 on patterns, technically. So if you add all of that together, it comes up to $353.18 Canadian, or roughly $27.17 per pair of socks. So, if I just wanted 13 pairs of socks, I probably could have gotten a value pack from Costco or something, but that's not really the point of this. The point of this isn't to end up with lots of socks. The point of it is to learn how to knit in many different ways and end up with a really beautiful collection of art pieces that you can put on your feet at the end. So now I'm going to show you a top-down view of all of these socks, and we're gonna review them and compare and contrast a little bit, and I will be back in just a second. What you see before me here is the product of the most involved crafting project that I did in 2024. I also did do other crafting, I didn't just do this, but this is definitely the biggest project that I did. And to think that I've only actually gotten through 1/4 of the book is a little bit overwhelming now that I look at all of this here. But anyways, I thought this would be a good moment to compare and contrast the socks from the first quarter of this book. So I'm gonna start with my highest rated socks, and it was actually a 3-way tie between the intersections sock, the rocking chair sock, and the Linea sock. And I'll start with the intersections. If I were to re-rate these, I don't know that I would rate these quite as high. I think they're great socks. I think I was just really excited to be doing this challenge. I learned all sorts of new things, so I felt very accomplished. They weren't particularly difficult, so I may have been a little bit generous with my rating, but yes, these were great socks. Now when it comes to the rocking chair socks, I, in hindsight, again, don't know that I would have rated them quite as high. I think a big part of the reason why I gave them that high of a rating is that compared to the socks that I knit just before, the Craftspedia socks, they were just so much easier and so much more fun and enjoyable to knit. So that may have also contributed to the high rating, but I do think that they are still great socks. Now the last pair that I rated 9, if I had to go back and choose a favorite pair of socks, it would definitely be the Linea socks here. They were challenging enough to keep it interesting, but I had also kind of mastered my cabling technique by that point, so I enjoyed it way more than the Craftspedia socks. I actually wonder if I had switched these in the order of my knitting experience, how my rating system may have changed. But anyways, I think these are kind of the perfect socks, and I loved the heel. Everything about them is just really great. So Linea socks are the winner. Now, for my lowest rated socks, there is a clear loser, I guess, and then there is tied in second last place 2 more pairs of socks. But my least favorite socks, and I felt so bad rating them so low, I rated these a 3 out of 10. These are the Lempi socks. And I talked about this at length, but it really comes down mostly to this cuff here. You cast on a certain number of stitches and you don't increase or decrease. I found the part of the sock that fit me perfectly was the colorwork section, but then you don't do any adjustments in terms of needle size or stitch count. And so the rest of the sock is just kind of floppy and loose. And I kind of dealt with that by knitting a shorter foot, but in terms of the cuff, nothing about this cuff makes sense to me, because even though it's 2x2 rib, it's interrupted, so it doesn't, you lose the effect of it cinching in. Anyways, I'm gonna stop repeating myself because I already explained all of this, but even with some, hindsight and a few months that have passed, I'm still upset with this sock. I just wish the whole thing had been this colorwork pattern, because I think it's really beautiful and it was not that hard to do, and in hindsight, it was the part that I was most nervous for, but it ended up being kind of the best part of the sock for me. So anyways, these are unfortunately my lowest rated socks, but if you were to knit these yourself, there are things you could do to compensate for that, I think I explained it when I talked about these socks, but yeah, just casting on less stitches, maybe just doing a 2x2 rib and then increasing and then decreasing at this point, and it's a solvable problem. So tied for second last place were, interestingly, 2 of the socks that I actually find to be the most beautiful. So that is the Craftspedia socks and the Avena socks. So I'll start with the Avena socks. So this was the second pair of socks in the book that I knit, and in hindsight, again, hindsight, you learn so much with hindsight. I think it's quite unfortunate that this sock appeared so early in the book for me. You may remember that at this point, when I approached this pattern, I had been knitting for less than a month. I had only read like, I don't know, 3 different knitting patterns. I didn't know what I was doing, and honestly, the sock was just too advanced for me at the time. However, I learned so much through this process. It was not a process I enjoyed, but I think I became, I just took leaps forward in terms of my knitting abilities by forcing my way through this pair of socks. The interesting thing about this, when I think about it later, is that knitting the sock itself wasn't actually super difficult. The really difficult thing about it was understanding the pattern, decoding the pattern. A few people had commented on how there may have been translation issues in the German and the French versions of the pattern, and I had the same impression when I revisited this pattern last night, just out of curiosity. It kind of felt like the pattern was put through Google Translate a whole bunch of times, and things just kind of got muddled and lost in translation over time. The way that it was also written was a little bit redundant. Sometimes things were kind of over-explained, or they were explained again in different wording, and then other parts were totally glossed over. And on top of that, there were also a couple of mistakes in the pattern, not just mistakes with, the instructions, but also grammatical mistakes. I remember there were a bunch of random dashes through notes, and I really don't want to be the grammar police here. I live somewhere where I have to speak in a second language all the time. I'm making grammar mistakes all of the time, but it was to the point where it was actually, it was just confusing, and I didn't know what the pattern was asking me to do. So even in revisiting this pattern, I still found it confusing. So partly my struggle with this sock was that I was just not experienced enough as a knitter. But I think also now that I have a bit more experience and feel a lot more confident understanding knitting patterns, I still find that pattern to be quite confusing. So I don't think it was entirely my fault. Now, the other sock that I rated a 5 out of 10 is the Cresspedia sock, and the issue with this is actually the opposite of the Miina. The Miina sock was not that hard to knit, but the pattern was difficult to understand. The Cresspedia, the pattern was super clear, no complaints there, but I found the knitting experience to be very difficult. Now, as I mentioned with the Linea sock, in between these two socks, I got a lot better at cabling. So I really struggled at the time with all of these cabling. I also have a bit of a grudge against these socks because after I finished them, I had some pain in my thumbs and I stopped knitting for almost 3 months. So there's a little bit of baggage here. I think that if I were to knit these again, which I don't think that I will, but if I were to knit them again, I don't think it would be as difficult of an experience. Again, I rated them low, and it probably was more so to do with me than with the sock, and certainly not the sock pattern and the way that it was written. It was actually very clear. I also wanted to talk about the easiest socks and the hardest socks, and interestingly enough, the hardest socks were the ones that I rated low. I guess I just rate things that I find difficult low. And then the easiest socks were definitely the rocking chair socks. The porch light socks were pretty easy too. I mean, it's mostly just a vanilla sock. So that was a pretty easy sock. And honestly, the lumpy socks were pretty easy too, once I figured out my method for the color work. Now let's talk about yarn. When I started this challenge, I thought I would just kind of gloss over yarn and not focus on it too much because it has nothing to do with the book per se, but it's pretty hard to talk about your knitting without acknowledging yarn. So my favorite yarns were probably, well, I really liked this lichen and lace yarn. It felt really nice to knit with, and it's feels quite durable. I haven't actually worn these socks, so I don't know, but I really did like that yarn. I love knitting with Drops Nord. I have often heard that it felt like crazy. I have not actually worn these socks out, so I don't know, but I just love how it feels in my hands. I'm very sorry to interrupt my video, but there was one last yarn that I wanted to give a special mention to, and that is Sisu by Sandnes Garn. This is a very hard wearing yarn, and I've actually used it a couple of times since then. So big thumbs up to Sisu by Sandnes Garn. However, if I had to pick a number one yarn out of all of this, it would be what I used for the Crestpedia socks, Laine, and I have used that yarn again for different socks. And it is a fantastic yarn because it is a light fingering and it feels kind of hardy, but when you wash it, it softens up. And the really special thing about this yarn, which didn't actually come into play when I knit these, is that it comes with reinforcement thread. And in hindsight, I wish I had used it, held it double with the yarn when I knit the heel and maybe the toe so that these socks would last longer, given the trouble that they gave me. But in the future, I would really like to work with that yarn again, and it was not the most expensive of all of the yarns that I used. The most expensive was definitely Shirley Bryan yarn. It was actually more expensive than my mini skein set of 6 mini skeins, and it's a hand-dyed yarn, and it's a fade yarn. I have no idea how this kind of a yarn gets dyed. I'm sure it's a very involved process. So yeah, that was definitely the splurge of all of these socks. The least expensive socks to knit were actually these ones because I used only leftover yarn. So I spent, the way that I count it in my head is that I spent $0 on them. Now, the worst yarns, well, I don't really want to call them the worst yarns, but the yarns that I had the worst experience with were from socks 3 and 4. I'll talk about the Jilly socks first. And you can tell here that I have worn these. This was a farm yarn from a farm called Les Brebis du Beau Rivage. It's local to me, and it's a single ply, and it's super rustic, and I was very enthusiastic. I'm glad I had the experience of knitting with that kind of a yarn, but I don't know that it's really the best kind of yarn for socks. It kind of was constantly twisting itself all of the time. But yeah, in hindsight, maybe that wasn't the best choice of yarn, especially as I was not really very experienced at the time. It was a little bit harder to use. And I remember when I went back to my merinos after that, it felt so much easier and nicer. So yeah, I'm not hating on the yarn. I just don't know that it was necessarily the best choice for these socks. The other ones, and please don't hate me for this because I know this is a super popular yarn, is Cascade Heritage. Now, you will see that I've also worn these socks, but I would like to clarify that I've worn these socks maybe 2 or 3 times, and I've washed them 1 additional time. These socks are pilling and looking really, really rough, and it's very disappointing because this was actually one of my favorite patterns that I made. This is the Branches sock, and this, I don't know if I just got a bad ball, like from a bad batch or something, but my ball also had tons of knots in it, and as I was knitting there were already like pills forming. You can see me picking them out here. It doesn't have a lot of stitch definition, and I just feel like this sock turned into kind of a limp and sad sock, and I'm a little bit disappointed with the performance of that yarn. It was super soft as I was knitting it, so as I was knitting I really enjoyed it. But I very quickly learned, even as I was knitting it, that it was kind of like disintegrating in my fingers. So I know it's a really popular yarn, which makes me wonder if maybe I just had a bad batch, something happened to it in processing and it made it weaker. I don't know, but that also didn't score a lot of points in terms of my favorite yarn. Now, the last point that I would like to touch on is which of these socks would I knit again? Now that I've had a little bit of time to process, when I look at all of these, which are most interesting for me to recreate? And full disclosure, I actually already have knit one of these pairs of socks again, and it is the Morning Coffee socks. So I mentioned earlier in this video that my aunt passed away, and that I had visited her not long before she passed away. Anyways, when I visited her, she expressed interest in wanting a pair of hand knit socks. So of course, I said, of course, Tia, I'll make you socks. And I promised her a pair of socks for Christmas, and her and I have the same foot size, but her feet were quite swollen at the time. So I had to mull over what kind of a sock pattern to make and what size to make them. And I had recently finished these ones, and so I thought, well, this is perfect because these really, really stretch out. So if her feet get less swollen, then they'll still fit, but while they are swollen, she'll be able to wear them. I knit them top down and just with one yarn. So I definitely simplified the recipe, and I did a heel flap and gusset. So really the only part of this pattern that I reused. was the stitch pattern here. And you can knit this in any size as long as your stitch count is a multiple of 4. So that's what I did. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get them to her before she passed away, but I did complete the socks. And so yes, I have made one pair of these socks already since completing my first quarter. However, if I had to choose another pair of socks to reknit, there are 2 that I would reknit, and one of those may surprise you. The first that I would reknit are, again, the branches sock, and I think that's just because I'm so sad with how this yarn performed, and I love this sock pattern. I'd also made that silly mistake because of the errata in the pattern that I didn't notice, so I kind of feel like I'd like to have a do-over with this particular pair of socks with a different yarn and without a mistake. The other pair that I would like to maybe reknit, and again, this might surprise you, is the Avina sock. However, I would like to reknit this once I've finished the challenge, and I would like to reknit it and just see how, after having knit all 52 pairs of socks in the book, how my experience changes. So when I had reviews these socks, I said that I would not knit them again, but I take it back. I am kind of curious to knit these again, but not yet. I'm still healing from this process. So enjoy one last look at all 13 pairs of these socks. Now that they have been immortalized, I feel like I can finally start wearing them. I might wear these ones first. I really, really love these socks. I think they're the only ones I didn't mention in my little review here. Well, also the artichoke socks, but that's because I literally just talked about them in this video. All right, back to Carmen. So I'd like to close out this video with a bit of a reflection on my experience knitting the first quarter of this book. And I was trying to figure out a way to put it into words last night as I was preparing to film this. So I've mentioned quite a few times in these videos that I'm a musician. I'm a classical musician. I play the cello. I work in an orchestra, but I also do a lot of freelance work. Anyways, I spent many years studying at conservatories and universities and various schools and privately and all of that thing. Anyways, and something that a lot of classical musicians will know is that when you're studying, you often have to learn what are called studies or etudes. And they're basically short pieces of music that are technically difficult in one specific way. So you might have a book of 40 etudes, and each one of these 40 little pieces that are like maybe just a page long will have, like, maybe one of them is, the focus is on like a sautier technique for your bow. Maybe one of them has arpeggios that helps you with your intonation. Each one of these little pieces, the purpose of it is to help you master a technical skill so that at the end of the etude book, you have a collection of skills that you can then use and apply to your performances in the future. And it's one of the foundations of music education, I would say. And I kind of think of this book in a similar way. I don't think this challenge would have worked for me if it were 52 weeks of shawls or 52 weeks of sweaters. This works because socks are small. It's a small project. It's very easily digestible. You don't have to make a massive commitment to any one of these patterns, because even if you don't really like it, there is always an end in sight when it comes to socks. I think that this was a really happy accident for me to learn how to become proficient at knitting fairly quickly. I had been knitting for less than a month before I started this. I had almost no experience knitting at all. I had knit 3 pairs of socks, and 2 of those pairs were vanilla socks. So I really did not know what I was doing at all. As I mentioned with the Avina socks, they were too difficult for me at the time. So there were a few roadblocks here and there, but because I was able to learn a new technique with pretty much every sock, quite quickly I was able to collect a lot of skills, and it was a way of learning a lot of new things quickly. By no means am I insinuating that I have the same amount of skill and experience as somebody who's been knitting for 50 years, or somebody who, inherited a yarn shop that has been in the family for generations. Like, I've been knitting for just over a year. Like, I know my place, but I do think that I became somewhat proficient at it kind of quickly because I was working through this book of etudes, essentially. So I think that this is a really good way of learning how to knit quickly, and not just knitting stockinette, but different specialized techniques. It's a really easy way to compare different methods, like different cast-on methods that give you sort of the same result, but it helps you find different ways of getting there. And I think that that's also a really useful exercise. And the last thing I'll say about that is because it's a pair of socks, because you're doing it twice, you always get a second chance, which is really nice, because sometimes these things are super hard once and I might be inclined to just write it off and never do it again. But because I have to do it a second time, it forces me to keep an open mind. And sometimes the second time it goes by really, really easily. So sometimes you just need to do the hard thing once or twice, and then it's not a hard thing anymore. And suddenly you've mastered a new skill and you can feel super accomplished and happy about that. So I think that that's been the major takeaway with this exercise of working through this book. Now, the major takeaway from the project of filming all of this has been maybe a little bit more deep and profound. I've spent the last couple of days as I'm filming this editing all of the footage from the last year, and I didn't really talk about what was necessarily happening in my life as I was filming all of those clips, but it was only a year ago, like I remember. And as I've mentioned, my aunt recently passed away. Earlier in the year, my grandmother passed away. I've had a couple people in my life get sick. A lot of things happened in 2024. It was not necessarily, I wouldn't say it was a bad year, but there were some stressful things that happened. And I know that this video is about socks, so I don't really want to, dive into that too much, but it was just really interesting to see my face change and to watch the year in review. Even though I was just talking about socks, like I can pick up any number of these socks and I remember what was happening. Like, I remember when I made these socks, I donated blood for the first time halfway through my first sock. That's like a big moment in my life that I am now, holding on to in my hands in a weird way and have documented online. I don't know. Editing all of this footage has been a bit of a process. It was like, 8 hours of footage or something. I definitely think I can learn to say more things in less words in the future. I think it'll make my editing experience easier and probably the watching experience easier too. So moving forward, I am thinking that this challenge is probably going to take me 4 years. I mean, it took me 1 year to do the first quarter. So my goal right now is to be done by the end of 2028? No, 2027. December 2027. That's my goal. I would like to be done by December 2027. So I better get on it. And just to give you a little sneak peek, I have already started the second chapter of this book. But that's all you're getting for now. You'll just have to wait a year to hear me talk about those socks. And the other little change that I would like to make is that I think I need to be editing as I go, because I spent like 3 days where I just edited footage for 8 hours a day, and that was too much. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for watching all 4. If you managed to watch all 4, let me know if you actually watched all of this footage, because it's a lot of hours. And who knows, maybe this is just a time capsule for me and I'm the only one who ever revisits it. But if you watched it, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for being here, and happy knitting, happy sock knitting, or whatever you're making these days. See you soon.